The dirt from my father's grave was still fresh on my heels when Angela slid the document across the antique oak table. She did not even wait for me to take off my black mourning veil. It was a formal eviction notice. 30 days to vacate the premises. Angela sat there, sipping a vintage Pinot Noir from a crystal glass, wearing my dead mother's pearl necklace like a trophy. "You are a relic of a past I am deleting," she said, her voice smooth as poison. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at her. She thought she had won. She was wrong. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. To the outside world, Angela was the devoted second wife who nursed my father, James, through his final, agonizing year. In reality, she was a parasite who had finally killed the host. For the last 12 months, she had systematically isolated him in the east wing of the Silver Creek estate, firing the nurses I hired and replacing them with staff who answered only to her. She controlled his phone, his visitors, and his pain medication. She played the role of the grieving lady of the manor perfectly, wearing designer silk to doctor appointments while I was out in the frost, pruning vines until my fingers bled. That was the dynamic. Angela managed the appearance of wealth. I managed the actual creation of it. I was 24 years old, a junior oenologist, and the only person on this property who knew the difference between a Cabernet and a Merlot grape. While Angela was busy liquidating my father's assets to fund her failed socialite lifestyle, I was the ghost in the fermentation tanks, checking sugar levels at 3 in the morning, negotiating with distributors, and keeping the Silver Creek label alive. People used to ask me why I stayed. Why, after I turned 18, did I not just pack a bag and leave them to their dysfunction? They called me weak. They said I had a victim complex, but they did not understand the invisible chain of the survivor. I did not stay because I was afraid of Angela. I stayed because this estate was not just real estate to me. It was history. It was my mother's sweat in the soil and my father's name on the gate. Leaving would have been an admission that Angela owned this place, and I refused to give her that satisfaction. I was not a victim trapped in a house. I was a guardian protecting a legacy. I endured the insults, the cold dinners, and the way she looked at me like I was a stain on her carpet, because I knew that as long as I was here, the vines would survive. I had been the silent operator, the keeper of the flame, waiting for the wind to change. But as I stared at that eviction notice, realizing she intended to kick me out before my father's body was even cold, I realized my silence had expired. Angela thought she was pruning a dead branch. She did not realize she was cutting into the root of a poisonous plant she knew nothing about. She wanted a war for the estate? Fine. But she had forgotten one thing. I knew where the bodies were buried, and I knew exactly which lever to pull to bring the whole house down on top of her. Angela did not wait for the 30 days to expire. She started erasing my father immediately. The morning after she served me the notice, the slam of a heavy van door pulled me onto the porch. A luxury consignment vehicle was idling in the driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as 2 men in white gloves carried out my father's vintage leather armchairs, his collection of first-edition nautical maps, and the hand-carved desk where he had signed the original deed to this land. Angela stood on the porch, pointing and directing, a glass of champagne in her hand at 10 in the morning. She was liquidating his memory to fund her future. I walked outside. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice calm but tight. "Those are not yours to sell." Angela laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. "Everything is mine to sell, darling. I am the surviving spouse. You are just a tenant overstaying your welcome. I am simply clearing out the clutter. We need to make room for the new vision." The new vision involved turning the Silver Creek estate into a tacky event center. Later that afternoon, a developer arrived. He was a slick man in a cheap suit who looked at the vines like they were weeds. I heard Angela telling him her plans. She wanted to bulldoze the South Acreage, the oldest Pinot Noir vines in the county, to put in a concrete parking lot and a wedding pavilion. "Wine is such dirty work," she said, wrinkling her nose. "It is all mud and bugs. Events are where the real money is. We will keep a few rows for photos, of course, but the rest has to go." I felt a physical sickness in my gut. She did not just want the money. She wanted to destroy the identity of this place. She wanted to strip the value out of the land and replace it with a hollow shell of luxury. It was the illusion of power of the empty wallet. Angela had no intrinsic value of her own, no talent, no history, no connection to anything real. So she had to destroy what was real to make herself feel significant. She was trying to turn 100 years of history into a quick cash grab because deep down, she knew she was nothing without the checkbook. The house felt hollow as I passed through the empty spaces where my father's life used to be. I did not argue. I did not beg her to stop. I went to my room and packed a single bag. Angela smirked when she saw me in the hallway. "Finally leaving?" she asked. "Good. Make sure you take your trash with you." I smiled back. "I am just getting started, Angela. Enjoy the view while it lasts." I retreated to the cellar. It was the only place on the estate Angela never visited. It was too cold, too dark, and too full of the work she despised. The air smelled of oak, earth, and patience. This was my sanctuary. I walked past the rows of barrels to the back wall, to a specific wooden crate marked 1998. It was the year I was born. My father had laid down 12 bottles of Cabernet that year, telling me since I was a child that we would open them when the season changes. Well, the season had changed. It was winter now. A long, hard winter. I pried the lid off the crate. Inside, nestling in the straw, there were no wine bottles. Instead, there was a heavy, fireproof lockbox and a thick envelope with my name on it in my father's handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I sat on the cold concrete floor and tore it open. "Morgan," the letter began. "If you are reading this, I am gone. And if you are down here, it means Angela has done exactly what I feared she would do." I read the words, and for the first time since the funeral, I cried. Not from grief, but from relief. My father had not been blind. He had seen everything. He wrote about the nights he pretended to be asleep while Angela berated me. He wrote about the bank notifications he saw but never mentioned, tracking the money she siphoned from the operating accounts. He explained his silence. "I was sick, Morgan. Too sick to fight a war on two fronts. If I had confronted her while I was alive, she would have made your life a living hell, and she might have found a way to contest the will before I could secure it. So I played the part of the dying, foolish old man. I let her think she was winning. I let her think she was in control. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, watching her treat you like a servant in your own home. But I needed time. I needed to build a fortress she could not breach." The letter detailed everything. The silence was not weakness. It was a strategy. He had been the silent guardian, enduring his own form of torture to ensure that when the moment came, I would have the weapon I needed. "I am sorry I could not protect you loudly," he wrote, "but I have protected you legally. Inside this box is the key to the kingdom. Take it to Dr. Richard. And then, take back our home." I wiped my eyes. The tears were gone. In their place was a cold, hard resolve. I stood up, clutching the lockbox to my chest. Angela was upstairs planning to pave over my heritage. She thought she was the queen of the castle. She did not know the king had left the keys in the dungeon. I drove straight to the law offices of Dr. Richard, my father's executor and oldest friend. The heavy fireproof lockbox sat on the passenger seat like a silent passenger. I did not call ahead. I walked past the receptionist and straight into his office. Richard looked up from his desk, saw the box in my arms, and let out a long, heavy sigh. He did not look surprised. He looked relieved. He stood up and locked the door behind me. We sat in silence as I keyed in the code my father had left in the letter. The lockbox hissed open. Inside was a single flash drive and a hard copy of a document bound in blue legal paper. Richard took the document. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages he had clearly helped draft years ago. "This is the irrevocable trust deed," he said, his voice steady and professional. "Your father transferred the entire Silver Creek estate, the winery, the brand rights, and the land into a trust in your name 3 years ago. Technically, Angela has been living in your house for 36 months. She has no claim to the property. None." I nodded. I expected that. My father had hinted at ownership, but I never knew the mechanics. But then, Richard turned the page. "But that is not all, Morgan. There is an addendum here. We call it a poison pill clause. Your father was terrified that Angela would try to harm you the moment he passed. He wanted to ensure that if she acted out of greed, she would pay for it." He pushed the document toward me, pointing to a highlighted paragraph. It stated that Angela was entitled to a marital stipend, a generous monthly allowance drawn from the estate's profits on the condition of good behavior. However, the clause was specific. If Angela attempted to sell any estate assets, or if she attempted to evict the primary beneficiary, me, within 30 days of his death, the stipend would be immediately and permanently voided. I stared at the words. My father had weaponized her greed. He knew she would not be able to wait. He knew she would try to liquidate the vintage furniture and kick me out before the grass grew on his grave. By serving me that eviction notice yesterday, and by selling his desk this morning, Angela had not just been cruel. She had financially committed suicide. She pulled the trigger, Richard said softly. She violated the terms less than 48 hours after his death. She gets nothing. No allowance. No payout. She leaves with what she came with. I sat back in the leather chair. The cold calculation of it took my breath away. My father had not just built a shield, he had built a guillotine, and he had waited for Angela to stick her own neck under the blade. I looked at Richard. She thinks she is selling the house tomorrow, I said. Richard smiled, a sharp, shark-like expression I had never seen on him before. Then I suggest we go tell her she is trespassing. The next morning, exactly 24 hours after she had served me the eviction notice, I walked into the kitchen. Angela was there, already dressed in a tailored suit, sitting with a woman I recognized as a high-end real estate agent. They were laughing over coffee, discussing listing prices and staging strategies. My father's chair was pushed to the side, replaced by sleek, modern stools that looked out of place against the rustic stone walls. Angela looked up, her smile tight and dismissive. "Good morning, Morgan. This is Brenda. She is helping me get the property ready for market. I assume you are packing? You only have 29 days left." Silence was my opening move. I walked to the coffee pot, poured myself a cup, and sat down in my father's chair, pulling it back to the head of the table. Angela's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" she said. "I am in a meeting." "I am afraid your meeting is over," I said, my voice calm. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a formal notification from Dr. Richard's office, outlining the activation of the poison pill clause. Angela glanced at it, scoffed, and then started to read. I watched her face. It was a fascinating study in the anatomy of a downfall. First, confusion, then disbelief. And finally, a pale, shaking terror. The silence in the room stretched until it was almost deafening. The real estate agent looked between us, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. "This is a joke," Angela whispered. Her hands were trembling so hard the paper rattled against the table. "This is not legal. He would not do this to me." "He did," I said. "He knew exactly who you were. He knew you would try to sell this place before the flowers on his grave had wilted. So he made sure that if you tried, you would lose everything. The stipend, the allowance, the car. It is all gone, Angela. You breached the contract. You evicted yourself." She stood up, knocking her chair over. "You little witch!" she screamed, her composure shattering. "I was his wife. I nursed him. I deserve this money." "You deserve nothing," I replied, not raising my voice. "You isolated a dying man. You abused his daughter. You tried to destroy his legacy for a quick payout. You gambled on his weakness, but you forgot to account for his intelligence." I stood up. My shadow fell across her paperwork like a gavel stroke. "You gave me 30 days to get out of my own home. The trust gives you 0, but I am not unreasonable. I will give you until the locksmith arrives. That is about 45 minutes. Angela looked at the real estate agent, desperate for an ally, but the woman was already packing her bag, clearly wanting no part of this disaster. Angela turned back to me, her eyes wild. "I am not leaving. You cannot make me." "Actually, I can," I said. "I have already called the sheriff. He is on his way to remove a trespasser, and since you just voided your own prenup, I suggest you start packing whatever you can carry. The Louis Vuitton bags you bought with the operating budget might be all you have left." The sheriff arrived 10 minutes later. He did not need to use force, but his presence was enough. Angela screamed about fairness, about her sacrifice, about how she had given everything to a man who betrayed her. But as she dragged her designer luggage down the gravel driveway, her heels sinking into the dirt she despised, she looked small. The grandeur was gone. She was just a woman who had gambled on greed and lost. I watched her car disappear down the long, winding road. When the taillights faded, the silence returned. It was different this time. It was not the tense, suffocating silence of walking on eggshells. It was deep and heavy, like the earth after a storm. I called the locksmith, changed every tumbler in the house, and then I walked out to the vineyard. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the rows of vines. I walked to the edge of the south acreage, the place Angela had wanted to pave over. The soil was cold and rich under my boots. I could feel the life in it, the dormant energy waiting for spring. The invisible chain that had bound me to this place for so long, the fear that if I left, it would die, was gone. It was replaced by a different weight. The weight of ownership, the weight of responsibility. But this was a weight I chose to carry. I had brought a bottle with me, one of the 1998s from the crate. I didn't drink it. Instead, I pulled the cork and poured the dark, ruby liquid onto the ground at the base of the oldest vine, a libation for the ghosts. For my mother, who planted this seed, and for my father, who watered it with his silence so it could survive the drought. They say that revenge is a dish best served cold, but I disagree. The best revenge isn't about destruction. It is about preservation. It is about standing in the wreckage of someone else's greed and realizing that you are the one holding the seeds of the future. Angela wanted to erase the past to build a monument to herself. I saved the past to build a future for this land. That is the justice of the sower. We do not just cut down the weeds. We plant something stronger in their place. I looked out over the valley, my valley, and took a deep breath of the cold air. The war was over. The work was just beginning. And for the first time in my life, I was ready for the harvest. So, tell me, have you ever had to stay silent to win a bigger war? Have you ever had to protect something precious from someone who couldn't see its value? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one.